of other trees of substantial size. That was in effect for, I think, 7 or 8 months before the council apparently got too many angry phone calls and did repeal it.
Follow up, Alderman Cadella?
Thank you for the history lesson. I guess I don't like the answer that I assumed it was going to be. I guess I might still be looking for any feedback from anybody else sitting on this side of the table if this is something we would ever consider pursuing again, maybe tweaking it, maybe even making it larger. Maybe it's 16 or 18 inches, just something so that it's there for the more significant size and indigenous trees. That's all. Thank you.
Can I ask, is there a way to find out what other communities like ours are doing in this respect as tree preservation?
Certainly, we could do that.
That would help, I think. Alderman Coles and then Alderman Winger.
All right, I remember that ordinance. It was a certain diameter. If it were 12 inches in diameter or 10 inches, you had to get a permit to do it. But they didn't tell you where to measure the 10 inches or the 12 inches or the 18 inches. It could be here, it could be by the stump. Had no ordinance of where it can be cut from. And everybody was complaining about coming in and saying, hey, I got a tree I want to cut down, but I don't want to cut it all the way down. I only want to cut it part way down. And they had everything confused. So that's why they dropped it. And I think that's the reason why they took it off, because it was about 8 months of
Yes.
hectic.
Yeah, I don't remember the actual, as I say, I would have to try and find a copy of the ordinance and revisit it, but you may be correct. I don't know if they ever specified.
They didn't specify where the tree was going to be measured on the diameter size.
Right.
If the guy was 8 foot high and it was only 4 inches, he could cut it down. But if it was 10 inches down, right next to the stump, he couldn't cut it down. And it was,
And this was in addition to our tree preservation that we have now?
before this one, before we got the one now.
Okay.
Yeah, this was probably 15 years ago, 14, 15 years ago.
So it was a lot stronger than this?
Correct. It was more restrictive.
Okay. Alderman Winger?
Thank you. I realize, that we're talking about the applicability of this ordinance too, and I still think that we can, push builders to replace trees that they've removed, and perhaps even if it's in the footprint of the new home. Like if I look at section 6.1303, at the beginning it says, "It shall be unlawful for any person to remove any tree as defined herein without first having applied for and received a tree removal permit as provided in this article." And then the next section goes into the permit process. And I realize there's exceptions like emergency or diseased or weakened under the restriction. But then in the permit section, section B, the approval, number 3, it says economic hardship. And I'm thinking this is where it would come in, I need to remove a tree because it's in my footprint. And then it says the preservation of a designated tree or trees would deprive the owner of all economic viable uses of the parcel. In such cases, a permit shall not be unreasonably denied, but may be conditioned on the applicant replacing the removed trees pursuant to 6.1307A. So it leads me to believe that we still can hold them to doing replacement.
Yes, sir. Mr. Forrest?
Yes, I wish that were the case personally, but I'll leave that out of it, sorry. But, we have to go back to 6.1301, scope and application. I think that sort of takes precedent over this, the ordinance in defining what's covered by the ordinance.
And how so in that section, like what would we have to change for any future applicants to have that other section that I just read all encompassing? Like what do you see would we need to change in the scope and application?
We'd have to change the first article, 1301, so it would not read just new construction. We'd have to eliminate that whole article, basically.
Why? I don't understand the. And new construction is tear down or new construction, right?
I think we're talking about two different things, possibly. Alderman Winger, were you referenced number 3, economic hardship. In such cases, a permit shall not be unreasonably denied, but may be conditioned on the applicant replacing the removed trees. You were referring to that?
Yep.
John, I'm not quite clear. What contradicts that in 61301?
16301 says the article applies to new construction on properties or properties subject to annexation or on undeveloped land. Those are the only properties we can apply this ordinance to, if I'm understanding it. And any requirements in this ordinance all reflect back to, well, is it new construction on a vacant piece, or is it a vacant piece of property? That's all this ordinance applies to. If it doesn't apply to existing houses
Right.
where there might be 3 or 4 trees,
Right.
and for whatever reason, the owner decides he wants to take 1, 2, or 3, or all 4 trees down, this ordinance does not apply to that.
Alderman Shockey, can I?
Yes,
respond?
Alderman Weir, please do.
Okay, so I'm thinking the vacant land, let's see a parcel of vacant land, someone comes in with a drawing of how they want to build their house, and there's 5 trees where the footprint of the house is. They put the permit in, they take the pictures, they bring them in the process, and they would still be responsible to replacing those trees that they take out.
No.
Right. Why?
If they're within 6 feet, the way this ordinance is structured, if the trees are within 6 feet of the footprint of the house and/or the driveway, sidewalk, patio, they can be removed and not replaced. If there's a tree that's 7 feet outside of the footprint of the house or the driveway and they want to take that down, then they would need the permit, then they would have to replace according to the schedule that's included in the ordinance.
I keep going back to number 3, but we can, maybe we can talk offline and kind of hammer away at it.
What we may need is an addition that for lots where there isn't any new construction, or is that what you're thinking?
No, I thought number 3 covered it, but, like maybe we just, if Mr. Forrest and I can talk offline and keep looking at it and then come up with a proposal maybe of how to resolve that. Because if someone comes in and they want to take out 10 trees that are good size, they should help our community and replace.
Alderman Cadella?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 3 things. First, Alderman Coles remembered a big part of the previous ordinance's problem being that of vagueness of the tree caliber or diameter at what height. Unfortunately, a well-written ordinance is going to be lengthy and tedious and difficult to get through, but it's going to address things like that. I believe industry standard uses the term DBH, diameter or breast height, which is a range of like 4 to 5 feet as long as it's below a major crotch of a tree, and it probably is more involved than that. But there's an industry standard there, and if an ordinance referenced that vagueness goes away completely. Second question was brought up by somebody, perhaps Alderman Shockey, but somebody asked, do other municipalities have tree ordinances such as I'm asking for? And yeah, I've done research. They do, and some municipalities are pretty harsh and major sticklers about it. So they address trees smaller than 12 inches on private property where there is no redevelopment. So they do exist. Do they run into headbutting sessions with residents? Most likely, but they do exist and they do stick by them. Third, I believe at least part of tonight's discussion stemmed from a question about, does this tree preservation ordinance cover parkway trees? It's very vague. It talks about property in Wooddale, and it talks about at staff's either recommendation or requirement that a homeowner deal with a certified arborist to determine the viability of the tree. but it really doesn't address parkway trees. And I know we've got a parkway tree ordinance coming down the pike, but we don't have it yet. So the question before us is, does this apply to parkway trees? And if so, does it apply to it in each of these sections, or is it just partial? I don't understand where that ties in, so.
Mr. Forrest?
Well, this applies to vacant properties, and I would have to think it's properties under private ownership. Traditionally, and not only traditionally, but I believe legally, when somebody builds a new house, we have to allow them to cross the parkway with their driveway. Does that give them the right to cut down a tree that the city has planted or that may have been there for 100 years on city property? That's a question for you to answer. If somebody's designing a house and they want their driveway to come out a certain way, but it's going to necessitate taking down a tree that might be a 20-inch diameter oak tree, do we let them cut it down, or do we say, well, you know what, maybe you should retweak the configuration of your driveway, or maybe flip the house on the lot so the driveway comes out the other side? I mean, I think there are things we can do to control that. As far as somebody needing a permit to take a tree down on the parkway, perhaps Mr. Holm would have a comment on that, since it's his department that goes out to look at these trees. But again, I think you as a council have to decide what you want the character of the city to be.
Well, right now, for the parkway trees to be taken down, they have to either be dead or very ill, or destroying some sewer pipes or sidewalks, right?
That's correct.
So we have that, and we have the tree preservation that the homeowner has to come in with to rebuild. Now, which one takes precedent? Alderman Cadella, do you know?
Well, I'm not sure which one takes precedent. I just wanted to add to your list of reasons that that staff has been working with to remove parkway trees. And I think Gary can attest to this. You know, there's line of sight issues, but personally, I don't buy that. I mean, as long as it's not a major intersection, any tree is going to have a solid trunk that can't be seen through. So you could make that argument both ways all day long. I also believe that we've had some parkway trees, or at least one that I know of for sure, removed that was pretty old, as was the driveway next to it. And once again, I think we had a resident basically didn't like the tree, didn't like it being that close to their driveway, and they kind of used the line of sight argument. And it's a tough thing to fight without an ordinance for staff to rely on to argue that. So I think there may be a number of other reasons that the parkway trees have come down, and a lot of it probably stems from the fact that we don't have anything in writing. We don't have any direction that council's ever given. So, but I don't know how to answer your other question, Mr. Chairman, which takes precedent. Probably at this point we have nothing in writing saying it one way or another, and that would have to be addressed as well.
Mr. Holm, without talking about the address or name of the property that is in discussion, what is your take on the ordinance as it stands?
We have Article 6.6 of the ordinance. This is 6.13 before you, which is the tree preservation ordinance. Article 6.6 has been in the ordinance back since the 70s. That's related to parkway trees. That's what we're currently revamping right now. So Article 6.6 has been there and has discussed parkway trees. Article 6.13 just became ordinance, was it 07 or 06? I can't remember. 06, I think it is. Basically, staff, since that point in time, staff has interpreted Article 6.13 per 613.01 to apply to all areas where there's new construction. So if a lot is having a tear down or a lot is having a new house, Article 613 applies. If it's an existing house where we're discussing a parkway tree issue, Article 6.6 applies. That's kind of how we have been interpreting these ordinances. It's a parkway tree, or is it a new construction? And in this case, that's a pretty easy distinction. In this case, that particular house is new construction. So Article 613, and for the many reasons that John pointed out, perhaps just by shifting the driveway 2 feet, we can save a 100-year-old oak tree. You know, that's why you want to kind of go by 613.01 or 613 as opposed to 66.
And you're saying that with the new construction, we're talking about that the resident has to have a tree preservation plan, which would cover both the parkway and the part owned by the owner?
Right, correct.
Do we have any disagreement with that? Alderman Wesley? Well, we can have staff look at changing the tree preservation plan and to exclude parkway trees and have it as under the parkway tree plan, or parkway tree ordinance.
But under the Parkway Tree Ordinance, no parkway tree can be removed unless it meets those criteria. Damaging a pipe,
But we
site
could
distance to
change
a
that.
major intersection. So if someone does want to put a driveway out, suddenly they won't be able to put out their driveway out there at all. At least under 613, they could put their driveway out there, but then provide replacement trees. So under the scenario that's playing out in this particular lot, the answer would be, well, you're not covered under 613, you're covered under 66, and you can't take that tree down.
Alderman Wesley?
But is that ordinance in effect now?
Well, that's the ordinance.
parkway tree?
It'll probably be in effect next, I think it's going to come to council next week. So, I mean, it's, in 66 is already in effect. I mean, ordinance 66 has been in effect since the 70s. We're just making changes to it.
My opinion is, I think having two tree ordinances there, definitely confused. Why can't we just merge them, one ordinance all together? I mean, I think that's a whole key that's screwing this all up. I mean, here's a guy that wants to build a house. He wants to remove a parkway tree, but then we get told that, I get told from him that our staff tells us he has to hire an arborist to look at the tree on a parkway tree. But the problem is here, I just think it's, what is, and the guy is offering, put the trees back on his property or pay the city to replace these trees. I mean, here you're holding a resident hostage right now that can't revamp his driveway or.
Well, he's a builder. He's building a house, and in accordance with the ordinance, he has to prepare a tree preservation plan. It's that simple.
So, but more or less, I could go home right now and remove every tree in my backyard, and you guys cannot stop me from doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for planting that seed.
Do you have any trees in your backyard? Alderman Coles?
All right. When a street is getting rebuilt, we go down and look on the sidewalks to see what trees that we have to save. And if you go down Central, there was a beautiful, probably 150-year-old oak we were going to cut down around 250 Central. And Gary and Bennis and myself and Marshall, we says, they wanted to cut this thing down to put the sidewalk in. And we says, we don't want to cut that tree down because of the sidewalk. So we moved the sidewalk. And they did the same thing on Montrose. Montrose's sidewalk is like a snake. It goes all around the trees and everything. So we didn't cut them down. So, I mean, we're trying to save all the trees we can. So, I mean, I realize that these new builders come in, and if they have to cut a tree down, then we can get them to put a couple more trees in someplace else. Right now with this ordinance, where years ago, they used to just cut them down and nobody said anything. Like the lot here on Timber Lane or something, that place, it's amazing the guy even sold any houses on there, because nobody wants it, because there ain't no trees. But I think the ordinance is fairly good, and I think it's covered by the other one too, and I think that's the way it should be.
Okay, so we have a tree ordinance for the parkways. That's coming up, from what I understand, right? Okay, and we have a tree preservation rule for tear downs and rebuilds or new construction. Does anybody on the council want to make a recommendation for any changes? Alderman Winger.
I want the opportunity to meet offline with Mr. Forrest so we can look at this and determine if we want to make any changes or not. And then come back.
Alderman Cadella, you want
And
to
I-
join the group?
And I want to go on record as saying I'd like to make changes to section 6.1301 to go back to that 6 or 7 months of what might have been trouble, but perhaps a well-written ordinance could help a little bit. But I really want to address, trees on private property regardless of construction.
Can we do that then? Can we give staff direction to meet with Alderman Winger and/or Alderman Cadella and discuss it and come back with a recommendation to the city council?
That's fine,
Again,
yes, it's, whenever
giving
we're
you-
able to meet, that's fine.
Giving you time, 3 weeks, 5 weeks? Okay. That recommendation, everybody agree with? Alderman Wesley?
Well, then I think if that's the case, we better hold off on the other ordinance then. Well, they may be if we do some changes in them.
Alderman Cadella?
The whole idea of me bringing that other ordinance back out for the Parkway trees is to create a very specific and defined separation between city-owned trees and private-owned trees. So I really believe that's going to stand alone, and I'm going to push for that to trump a revised section 6.1301, even after we do make these changes. So I don't want to personally don't want to stop that. I think they're separate ordinances and they do two different things.
Anybody else? Do we have staff agreement? So we don't need a motion on that. Thank you very much. Items to be considered at future meetings, we have two, of course. The brick ordinance, which you will be back in 3 or 4 weeks, and the tree preservation ordinance, depending on the discussion between Alderman Cadella, Alderman Winger, and staff. Is there anything else for future meetings? What am I going to do next week? I'll make a motion then to adjourn the May 8th meeting of the Planning, Zoning, and Building Committee. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? May I pass the gavel on to the Public Works Committee and to be next, because the mayor's asked a favor to have the Finance Committee held off because he'd like to be here, and he'll be a little late.
Sure.
Is that okay with the Finance Director, Chairman? Okay.
And Ms. Schultz, would you like a break before we go into the next committee? It's up to you. Sure. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. I'm calling back to order the Public Works Committee meeting of May 8, 2008. And will the minute taker please reflect the same members are present? I make a motion to approve minutes dated April 24, 2008. Is there a second?
I second it.
On the question, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item, report and recommendation, final street listing 2008 roadway program, and it is enclosed in our packets. Question, Mr. Holm, other than, let's see here, with the direction given, let's see, resurfaced has been revised to delete Commercial Street between Grove and Wooddale Road and replacing Sunnyside Avenue. Are there any other changes from this listing to our 10-year plan that we laid out?
No, there are no other changes. Everything else is consistent with the plan.
Okay, thank you. I make a motion to accept the 2008 Street Improvement Program list of streets as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Anything on the question, Alderman Shockey?
It may not pertain exactly to these streets, but I have a question about the streets that have been done. On Potter, just east of Prospect, that one section that was buckled real badly and replaced. I had questions about that the other night from the people who live in the area at Georgetown. And they say that you fill it, not you, but the crack around it was filled in with asphalt or tar or whatever it is they use, but there's already cracking in there now. And I'd just like to make sure that, will that be done again before next winter so that we don't have water going in there and freezing and breaking it out? Is that something that is done periodically, or, because I did go over it and I looked and there is cracking. And by the way, it's still a little wavy. It's not smooth like the rest of the street is. I don't know if there's a way to shear off the bumps or,
Probably not at this point. I mean, some of that's the nature of when you do a patch as opposed to mainline paving. You know, they're very difficult to get as smooth as the mainline paving. With respect to cracking in asphalt, it's a normal phenomenon, and we do crack fill our streets. We don't usually crack fill them on a yearly basis. We crack fill them on a, depending on the nature of the street or the nature of the cracks, 2, 3 years, 5-year cycle. So to answer your question, will those cracks be filled this year? Probably not, but maybe by next year, there'll be enough cracks on all of the roads in that whole program to go out and crack fill. And so that's,
but these aren't normal cracks. These are where they cut it out to put the new section in. And they did pour stuff in there, but now it's already quite deep concave, and if water does get in there and freeze over the winter, that street's gonna take another resurfacing pretty
well,
soon.
and that's why we will come back on, you know, on a regular basis, on a 3-year or 5-year cycle, and that's typical for roadway maintenance. You even crack fill, when you do crack fill, in 3 or 5 years, those cracks may open up again, and you gotta go back and you gotta crack fill them again.
There's no way to have that contractor come, because it was his problem, right?
It was
They
his
had to
problem with the
replace it.
surface, and he actually crack filled that joint at our direction. I mean, that wasn't necessarily required. He was required to saw cut and repave, and we made him do the extra step of crack filling. Now, just because you can see the crack on the surface doesn't mean the crack fill material isn't farther down in the crack. And they fill the crack with that rubberized material. And again, in the next couple of years, we'll be back out there to crack fill it, as well as any other surface cracks that open up.
Okay,
That's a
thank
pretty
you.
typical course for maintenance.
Okay, so it sounds like your final commentary on that is that area is okay
Correct.
on Potter there. Okay, okay, thank you. So I have a motion, a second, anything else on the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is report and recommendation for the consultant selection for the industrial pre-treatment program. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Holm, but this is where you came to us and said that we need to look at this as, as a requirement from the, what is it, IEPA, to look at this program?
It's actually coming to us from the feds, the
Okay.
federal EPA.
Okay. And a committee was formed with Alderman Wesley, Alderman Cadala, Brad Kittleson, and Mr. Holm from our staff, and interviewed 2 consultants. And the results are in front of us. And Mr. Holm, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. We did interview 2 consultants, Huff and Huff and Baxter and Woodman. As indicated in the memo, we did feel that Huff and Huff had really good experience with regards to treatment plants, and they have really extensive experience with regards to pre-treatment programs, but on the private side, on private industry. Baxter and Woodman, we felt, had extensive experience in pre-treatment programs for municipalities and therefore more applicable. And we're recommending that Baxter and Woodman, that staff be directed to develop a scope of services and a cost then with Baxter and Woodman.
I make a motion to give direction from the committee to negotiate a scope of services and costs with Baxter and Woodman. Is there a second?
Second.
On the question, Alderman Shockey.
Now, this is, just to make it clear for the people watching, this is one of those instances where we don't get a bid up front. We have to choose the company and then negotiate the price.
Correct. This is a professional service, so you have to select based on qualifications.
Thank you.
Another question before I call the vote. Is it worthwhile to ask our finance department if this can be part of a special service area for our industrial park versus the city paying the cost of this once we sign a contract?
To answer your question, it probably won't work as a special service area because you wouldn't have continuity or continuity between all of the affected properties. And it's not necessarily just in the industrial park. You may end up having a pretreatment person on Irving Park Road or on Addison,
Okay.
so it's going to be all over town.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on the question? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed, motion carries. Next item is item number 6, report and recommendation, contract award, SSA number 13 roadway program. I make a motion to recommend that a contract be awarded to Arrow Road Construction in the amount of $2,731,037.34. Is there a second on the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is item number 7, report and recommendation, contract award, lawn fertilization and weed
Madam
control.
Chair,
Yes.
I'm going to excuse myself for this discussion.
Okay, that's Alderman Wesley recusing himself. And will the minute taker also reflect that Mayor Johnson has just joined us? And this is the lawn fertilization and weed control. And it looks like there was dialogue dating back from 2006 to look at perhaps ending some type of fertilization in our retention areas. However, it looks like that is a worthwhile item, and we're looking at expanding that as well to city lawn and looking at trying to come up with a better way of treating our lawns. And with that, I am going to ask Mr. Holm to give a summary. And one question though, Mr. Holm, in your summary, if at some point you could tell us how much we would have paid if we kept everything the same, and we might not have that dollar figure, but just comparable to 06, 07, 08, or however we can do that. That'd be great. Thank you.
This is coming before you tonight as a naturalized program for a 3-year program based on comments made from Stormwater Commission as well as the Public Works Committee back in 2006. There's been some discussions as to whether we want to fertilize, we want to do weed control. So I think I need to just give you the theory behind naturalized landscaping or naturalized lawn care. Today, typically, let's say the generic homeowner goes and buys the 5-step product that brings him up throughout the whole season. And those are all synthetics, in other words, chemicals that provide various things at various points in the season. And with rain and runoff, those chemicals end up in our streams and waterways, and they're detrimental to the environment. Naturalized landscaping basically takes the chemicals out of the equation, utilizes natural materials to do the same thing. And now not exactly, but I'll go through that in detail. Naturalized fertilizers, first of all, one brand name, one of the popular brand names out there is Milorganite. Milorganite is one of many. I'm just going to use that as an example so that I can demonstrate. Milorganite actually is a byproduct of the city of Milwaukee's treatment process for waste. So it's a naturalized byproduct that then goes onto the grass and breaks down slowly, providing nitrogen and iron and other nutrients for the grass. All natural product. There's, again, many naturalized products out there. That just happens to be one I'll use. So natural fertilization generally has the characteristics of, number 1, no chemicals, number 2, slow release over a long period of time. Naturalized weed control, and you'll see in here, we have a naturalized pre-emergent, but there's no naturalized post-emergent in this program. To kill the dandelions that you already see sprouting with the yellow flowers or the white going to seed, really the only natural way to do that is with vinegar. That's one of the big natural weed killers. pre-emergent, if you can get a pre-emergent on early enough in the season, preferably like March, February, you can do what is corn gluten, basically. It's corn, it's a byproduct of corn, and it's a natural product that inhibits root growth, basically. So the weeds and if you threw down grass seed, the grass seed wouldn't be able to develop roots. That's the whole point of a pre-emergent. So this program allows for pre-emergent naturalized product as well as fertilization. And now why do you want to fertilize? The whole point behind a naturalized program is to keep the lawn well fertilized so that it is dense and so that it chokes out the weeds. If you let the lawn get weak, the weeds are stronger than the lawn, and the weeds will eventually take over. And we've all seen park district fields or school district field that turns nothing but weeds. And that's because the lawn seeds or the grass is weaker than the weeds. So if you don't promote the grass, the weeds are going to take over. To answer your question, is naturalized fertilizer or naturalized lawn care more expensive? Considerably more expensive. And that's why we didn't proceed forward in 2007, because we already had direction from council at that time, and we just finished out the direction that council gave us. Under this scenario coming before you tonight, if you elect to release the low bidder, and we go with the second lowest bidder,